In the forgotten space between warring kingdoms, where the river cuts through ancient forest like a silver blade, there lives a woman who has forgotten the sound of her own voice. Arden, the last survivor of a slaughtered pack, has made silence her shield and solitude her armor. For 12 years, she has moved through the wilderness like a ghost, her footsteps lighter than falling leaves, her presence barely disturbing the air around her. She buries her words beneath her tongue each dawn, swallows them back each night. The wolf inside her, once wild and free, now sleeps in chains of her own making. To howl is to be found, to sing is to be hunted, to speak is to die. But loneliness carves hollows that even the strongest cannot fill forever. And on the night when the moon hangs full and heavy in the velvet sky, when the weight of 12 years of silence presses upon her chest like stone, Arden makes a single devastating mistake. She sings, just once, just briefly, a melody that rises from her throat like a bird taking flight after years in a cage. Haunting, beautiful, and threaded with magic older than the mountains themselves. She doesn't know that her voice carries power. She doesn't know that water amplifies her gift, sending it rippling outward beyond the boundaries of her sanctuary. And she cannot possibly know that in his fortress carved from the mountainside, the Alpha King of the Western Territories pauses mid-command, his golden eyes narrowing as her song reaches him like a whisper across miles. She has remained hidden for 12 years, but one song is all it takes for her carefully constructed world to unravel, one moment of weakness to bind her fate to that of the most powerful and feared ruler in the territories. Her voice has betrayed her, and now it may be the only thing that can save her. Before we begin, remember to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Every day, a new story awaits you. Now, let us begin. The river spoke in whispers at dawn. This was Arden's favorite time, when mist clung to the water's surface like reluctant ghosts, when the world held its breath between darkness and light. She crouched at the bank, her reflection rippling back at her from the clear surface. Wild amber eyes, sun-browned skin, and hair that had grown past her waist in tangled chestnut waves. 12 years in the wilderness had stripped away any softness that might have once existed in her face, leaving behind sharp angles and watchful eyes. She dipped her hands into the cold water, letting it run through her fingers. The sensation anchored her to the present, as it had done every morning since she'd found this hidden place between two forgotten kingdoms. The birds had not yet begun their morning songs. In this suspended moment, Arden allowed herself to breathe deeply, filling her lungs with the scent of wet earth and pine. This was the only time she permitted herself such indulgence. Once the sun fully crested the eastern mountains, she would become a shadow again, moving silently, breathing shallowly, existing as little more than a ghost among the trees. Survival demanded nothing less. She gathered water in a wooden bowl she'd carved years ago, its edges worn smooth from daily use. As she straightened, her gaze swept the opposite bank out of habit, scanning for any sign of intruders. The forest stood silent, undisturbed. 12 years, and no one had found her sanctuary. 12 years of safety purchased with vigilance and silence. 12 years since the night she'd watched her pack burn. The memory surfaced unwanted, as it often did in these quiet moments. Flames licking at the night sky, screams that still echoed in her dreams, the heavy scent of smoke and blood, her mother's final words, "Run, and don't look back. Don't make a sound. They hunt by sound." She'd been 10 years old then. Now, at 22, those words remained branded on her soul. Arden returned to her shelter, a small, well-hidden dwelling built into the side of a hill, and reinforced with stone and wood over the years. From the outside, it appeared to be nothing more than an outcropping of rock and earth. Inside, it was surprisingly warm and dry, with enough space for her few possessions. A bed of furs, tools she'd crafted, dried herbs hanging from the ceiling, and a small hearth built so that the smoke dispersed through hidden channels. She set down the water and tended to the coals of last night's fire, coaxing them back to life with practiced hands. A small rabbit she'd caught yesterday hung nearby, ready to be skinned and prepared. Another day of survival. Another day of silence. As the sun climbed higher, Arden moved through the forest like a whisper. Her feet found the spaces between fallen leaves, avoiding twigs that might snap. Years of practice had taught her to blend with the shadows, to move with the rhythm of the forest rather than against it. She gathered berries, checked her traps, and harvested medicinal herbs, all without disturbing the natural sounds around her. To the few animals that noticed her passage, she was just another predator moving through their domain, perhaps stranger than most, but one they had grown accustomed to over the years. Sometimes she would catch the curious gaze of a fox or deer, a moment of recognition between beings who shared the same woods before they parted ways. By midday, she had returned to her shelter with her small harvest. As she worked to preserve the herbs, binding them in bundles to dry, her fingers moved deftly, remembering the patterns her mother had taught her so long ago. Healer's hands, her mother had called them. Hands that could mend what was broken, ease pain, and bring comfort. But what good were healer's hands when everyone you loved was already gone? Arden pushed the thought away. Dwelling on the past wouldn't change it. She'd learned that lesson in her first year alone, when grief had nearly consumed her. Now she focused only on the present. The sensation of dried grass between her fingers, the scent of wild mint and yarrow, the sound of the river flowing ceaselessly beyond her shelter. The river had been her companion these 12 years. It spoke when she could not, sang when silence pressed too heavily upon her, moved when she felt frozen in place. Sometimes in the deepest part of night, when even the owls rested, Arden would sit by its banks and imagine it carried her thoughts away, out to the sea and beyond, to places she would never see. As evening approached, Arden prepared her simple meal. She ate methodically, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and gold through the small opening of her shelter. In this moment, surrounded by the simple life she'd built, it was almost possible to forget the world beyond her forest, almost possible to forget the wars between shifter kingdoms that had stolen everything from her. Almost, but not quite. Night fell, bringing with it a chorus of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl. The moon rose, nearly full, casting silver light that transformed the forest into something magical and otherworldly. On nights like these, when the moon called to the wolf that slumbered within her, Arden felt the ache of her self-imposed isolation most keenly. Wolves weren't meant to be alone. Even in human form, the pack instinct remained, the yearning for connection, for belonging. 12 years was a long time to deny that essential part of herself. She hadn't shifted since the night her pack was destroyed. At first, it had been fear that prevented her, fear that the hunters would sense another shifter's energy, that they would find her. Later, as years passed and the immediate danger faded, it became habit. The wolf was too loud, too wild, too likely to howl her loneliness to the stars. Safety lay in humanity, in smallness, in silence. Tonight, though, the moon's pull was stronger than usual. Restlessness coursed through her veins, setting her skin tingling and her heart racing. Arden paced the confines of her shelter, feeling suddenly trapped by the walls that had protected her for so long. She needed air. She needed space. She needed something she couldn't name. Against her better judgment, Arden slipped out into the night. The forest welcomed her with silver-dappled shadows and the soft whisper of leaves stirred by a gentle breeze. She moved toward the river, drawn by its constant song. The water gleamed under the moonlight, a ribbon of liquid silver winding through the darkness. Arden sat on a flat rock at the water's edge, letting her feet dangle just above the surface. The night was quiet, except for the river's gentle babble and the occasional rustle of small nocturnal creatures going about their business. It was in moments like these that the silence she'd wrapped around herself like armor became a weight too heavy to bear. 12 years of swallowed words, of stifled sounds, of songs unsung. 12 years of existing rather than living. 12 years of solitude that had kept her safe, but left her hollow. Perhaps it was the moon's influence, or perhaps it was simply that loneliness has its breaking point. Whatever the reason, Arden felt something crack open inside her chest, a fissure in the careful walls she'd built around herself. Without conscious thought, she opened her mouth and released a sound so soft it barely disturbed the night air. A single, pure note that rose from her throat like a bird taking flight after years in a cage. It wavered, uncertain at first, then gained strength as she remembered how it felt to make music with her voice. The sound of her own voice after so long was strange, almost frightening, but once begun, she found she couldn't stop. The note became a melody, wordless but full of emotion. All the grief, loneliness, and yearning she'd suppressed for 12 years, pouring forth in a haunting song that seemed to rise from the river itself. Arden closed her eyes, losing herself in the release. She sang to the moon and the stars, to the river and the trees, to the memories of those long gone, and to her own surviving spirit. She sang because the alternative was to shatter completely under the weight of her isolation. She didn't notice how the forest had grown utterly still around her, all creatures pausing to listen to this unfamiliar sound. She didn't see how the water before her seemed to shimmer with responsive energy, carrying her song along its current. She didn't sense how her voice, unused for so long, now carried power in its cadence, power that traveled farther than any ordinary sound should. What Arden couldn't know, as she finally allowed herself this one moment of release, was that her song was traveling beyond the boundaries of her sanctuary, beyond the forest's edge, into territories she had avoided for 12 years. She couldn't know that her voice, carried by water and wind and something more ancient than either, was reaching the ears of someone who had never heard its like before, someone whose very nature made him acutely sensitive to unusual sounds in his domain, someone who would not rest until he found its source. Miles away, in a stone fortress built into the side of a mountain, the Alpha King of the Western Territories paused in his pacing. Matthias Blackthorn, ruler of the most powerful shifter kingdom in the known lands, turned his head slightly, his enhanced senses picking up something that his advisors, still droning on about border disputes, could not detect. "Silence," he commanded, his deep voice cutting through their arguments. The council chamber fell immediately quiet, none daring to question their king's sudden order. Matthias moved to the balcony overlooking the vast forest that spread below his fortress. His eyes, golden and sharp as a wolf's even in his human form, scanned the darkness as if expecting to find the source of the disturbance. "My lord?" his chief advisor ventured after several tense moments. Matthias raised a hand, demanding continued silence. There, faint but unmistakable, a melody carried on the night wind. A woman's voice, singing something that stirred a strange recognition deep in his chest, though he was certain he'd never heard this voice before. It was not merely the beauty of the sound that caught his attention, though it was indeed beautiful. It was the power woven through it, a power that called to his wolf in a way he had never experienced. "Someone is using song magic in my territory," he said at last, his voice low and dangerous. "Find out who." His advisors exchanged nervous glances. Song magic was rare and unpredictable, typically manifesting only in those with ancient bloodlines. More importantly, those who possessed such gifts were supposed to be registered with the crown, controlled, monitored, utilized for the kingdom's benefit. "It comes from the eastern border," Matthias continued, his golden eyes narrowing, "near the Silver Moon River. That area has been uninhabited since the border wars, my king," his general said. "The nearest settlement is 20 miles from there." Nevertheless, Matthias turned from the balcony, his face set in determined lines. Someone is there, someone with power. He looked at his assembled council, the decision already made in his mind. "Prepare my guard. We ride at dawn." As the council scrambled to fulfill his orders, Matthias turned back to the night, inhaling deeply as if he could capture the lingering notes of the song in his lungs. His wolf stirred beneath his skin, unusually restless. Whoever this singer was, whatever her purpose in his lands, he would find her. The Alpha King always found what he sought. Back by the river, unaware of the attention she had drawn, Arden's song finally tapered into silence. Her throat felt raw from the unaccustomed use, but her spirit felt lighter than it had in years. Tears streamed down her face, tears of release, of remembrance, of a grief finally acknowledged. For this one night, she had allowed herself to be heard. Tomorrow, she would return to silence and safety. Tomorrow, she would be a ghost once more. But as she made her way back to her shelter under the watchful gaze of the moon, a shiver of foreboding traced its way down her spine, a warning she couldn't interpret, but couldn't ignore. Something had changed tonight, shifted in a way she didn't understand. In her 12 years by the river, Arden had developed instincts as sharp as any wolf's. Those instincts now told her that her song had traveled farther than she intended, that the silence she had cultivated for so long had been broken in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. As she curled into her bed of furs, sleep eluded her. The moon's light filtered through the small opening of her shelter, casting a single silver beam across the earthen floor. Tomorrow, she decided, she would check her perimeter, refresh the protective measures she had established years ago, ensure that her home remained hidden. Tomorrow, she would be more careful than ever. But even as she made these plans, Arden couldn't shake the feeling that it was already too late, that her momentary weakness had set something in motion that could not be stopped. Her song had broken 12 years of silence, and the echo of that breaking rippled outward like concentric circles in still water, touching shores she had never intended to reach. Morning arrived with an unsettling stillness. Arden woke before dawn, her senses instantly alert. Something was wrong. The birds weren't singing their usual greeting to the sun. The forest held its breath, as if waiting. She rose swiftly, pulling on her worn leather boots and wrapping herself in the deerskin cloak that had served her through countless seasons. Her movements were quick but measured, careful not to make a sound. The events of last night returned to her in a rush. The moonlight, the momentary weakness, the song that had escaped her lips after 12 years of silence. Had it been a mistake? The question plagued her as she slipped from her shelter into the gray light of early morning. The air felt different, charged with anticipation. Or perhaps it was merely her guilt, her fear of having broken her own cardinal rule. Remain unnoticed, remain unheard. The river flowed as it always had, indifferent to her concerns. Arden approached its banks cautiously, scanning the opposite shore for any sign of disturbance. Nothing seemed out of place, yet the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. She'd survived this long by trusting her instincts, and now they screamed a warning she couldn't ignore. Moving with practiced stealth, Arden began checking the perimeter around her sanctuary. Over the years, she had established a series of subtle markers and alarms, arrangements of stones that would be disturbed by an intruder's passing, thin threads strung between trees at varying heights, collections of dry leaves placed strategically where they would crunch underfoot. These simple measures had warned her of the occasional hunter or traveler who strayed too close to her domain, giving her time to hide until danger passed. Today, all remained undisturbed, exactly as she had left them. Yet her uneasiness persisted, growing stronger as the sun climbed higher. By midday, Arden had circled her entire territory, finding nothing amiss. She should have felt relieved. Instead, the tension in her muscles only increased. Something was coming. She could feel it in the air, in the unusual quiet of the forest, in the restless stirring of her wolf beneath her skin. Returning to her shelter, she gathered essential supplies: dried meat and berries, water skin, flint and steel, medicinal herbs, and the small dagger she kept strapped to her calf. If necessary, she could abandon her home temporarily, retreat deeper into the wilderness until whatever threat approached had passed. She hesitated at the threshold, looking back at the space she had carved for herself over 12 years. It wasn't much, but it was hers, the only constant she had known since childhood. The thought of leaving, even temporarily, caused an ache in her chest she hadn't anticipated. A sudden crack of breaking branches shattered the stillness, followed by the distant thunder of hoofbeats. Arden froze, her blood turning to ice in her veins. Horses meant humans or shifters, organized and purposeful, not random travelers or solitary hunters. Her first instinct was to run, to disappear into the depths of the forest where no horse could follow, but something held her in place. Perhaps curiosity, perhaps fatigue from years of running, perhaps some deeper instinct she couldn't name. Instead, Arden climbed the sturdy oak that stood beside her shelter, its branches providing both concealment and a vantage point. Settling among the new spring leaves, she grew still as stone, her breathing shallow, her eyes fixed on the direction from which the sounds approached. They came through the trees like shadows given form, a company of mounted warriors, their movements disciplined and purposeful. Even from a distance, Arden could see they were no ordinary soldiers. They wore black and silver, their armor gleaming dully in the filtered sunlight. Their mounts were massive beasts, bred for battle rather than speed, moving with unnatural quiet for creatures of such size. At their center rode a figure who commanded attention, even without trying. Taller than the others, broad-shouldered, with an air of authority that marked him clearly as their leader. His hair was as black as a raven's wing, pulled back from a face that, even at this distance, Arden could see was striking in its harsh beauty. The Alpha King. It couldn't be anyone else. She had never seen him in person, but stories had reached her even in her isolation. Tales of the ruthless ruler who had united the fractured Western Pax through force and will, bringing an uneasy peace to lands that had known only warfare for generations. Matthias Blackthorne, the name whispered in fear and awe throughout the territories. What was he doing here, in this forgotten corner of his domain? The question sent ice through her veins as a terrible suspicion took root. Last night's song, had it somehow reached this far? Had it drawn him, like a predator to wounded prey? The company halted at the river's edge, almost directly opposite her shelter. Arden pressed herself more tightly against the oak's trunk, scarcely daring to breathe. From her perch, she could see the Alpha King dismount in one fluid motion, his movements betraying his shifter nature even in human form. He approached the water, crouching at its edge much as Arden had done countless times. His head tilted slightly, as if listening to something only he could hear. Then, to her horror, he lifted his face and looked directly toward her shelter, toward the tree where she hid. "I know you're there," he called, his voice deep and carrying easily across the water. "The one who sang last night. I heard you." Arden remained frozen, her heart hammering so loudly she was certain he must hear it too. How could he know? How could her voice have traveled so far? The Alpha King straightened to his full, impressive height. "You've hidden yourself well," he continued, his tone almost appreciative. 12 years, if my scouts are correct. That's quite an achievement. 12 years. He knew how long she had been here. The realization sent panic coursing through her. What else did he know? "I have no interest in harming you," he said, as if reading her thoughts. "Quite the opposite. Your gift is rare and valuable. I've come to offer you protection, and a place in my court. A place in his court." Arden nearly laughed at the absurdity of it. She, who had lived as a wild creature for over a decade, taking a place in the very seat of power and politics she had fled. The very idea was ludicrous. "Of course," the Alpha King added, his voice hardening slightly, "this is not truly a request. Those with song magic fall under royal jurisdiction. The law requires your registration and service." So there it was. Not an invitation, but a command. Not protection, but control. Arden had heard rumors of such laws, edicts requiring those with rare magical gifts to serve the crown. It was one of many reasons she had remained hidden for so long. Her mother had warned her of such dangers, had taught her to conceal the power in her voice from the time she was old enough to understand. "I'll give you until sundown to reveal yourself willingly," Matthias called, his golden eyes still scanning the trees. "After that, my men will cross the river and find you." He paused, adding more quietly, "Don't make this difficult. You've been alone long enough." With that, he returned to his mount, giving a short command to his soldiers. They established a camp at the river's edge, clearly settling in to wait as their king had promised. Arden remained in the tree, her mind racing through increasingly desperate options. She could run, abandoning everything she had built. But to where? She had survived this long by knowing her territory intimately, every cave, every hollow, every game trail. Beyond these woods lay unknown dangers and the constant threat of discovery. She could fight, but that was even more foolish. One woman against a company of trained warriors led by the most powerful alpha in the territories? It would be suicide. Or she could do as he asked, reveal herself, accept his protection, and become another tool in his arsenal of power. The thought made her skin crawl. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Arden finally climbed down from her hiding place, moving silently back to her shelter. Inside, she paced the small space, her mind working furiously. There had to be another option, a path she hadn't considered. Her gaze fell on the small wooden box tucked into a corner, one of the few possessions she had carried with her when she fled her burning home. Inside lay her most precious treasures, a silver pendant that had belonged to her mother, a small book of healing lore, and a vial of clear liquid that glimmered with faint blue light when disturbed. River's tears, her mother had called it. A rare essence distilled from a waterfall that flowed over stones with magical properties. It could hide a shifter's scent and energy signature for a short time, a last resort meant for desperate circumstances. If ever there were desperate circumstances, these were they. Arden opened the vial, the scent of rain and lightning rising from its contents. She hesitated only briefly before swallowing 3 precious drops, feeling the liquid burn down her throat like ice and fire combined. Almost immediately, A tingling sensation spread through her body, a momentary disorientation as part of her essence, the part that marked her as shifter and magic user, folded in upon itself, becoming undetectable. It wouldn't last long, perhaps an hour at most, but it might be enough. With renewed determination, Arden gathered only what was absolutely essential: her knife, a small pouch of dried food, her water skin, and the pendant that was her last connection to her mother. Everything else she would have to leave behind. As the sun touched the western horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues, Arden slipped from her shelter for what might be the last time. Instead of heading deeper into the forest, away from the river and the waiting soldiers, she moved parallel to the water's edge, downstream, keeping to the shadows and using every skill she had developed over 12 years of solitary survival. Her plan was simple, born of desperation: circle around behind the Alpha's company, cross the river where they weren't watching, and disappear into the wilds beyond. By the time they realized she had eluded them, the river's tears would have worn off, but she would be far enough away that her trail would be difficult to follow. It was a thin hope, but it was all she had. The forest grew darker as twilight deepened. Arden moved like a shadow among shadows, her feet finding purchase on silent paths known only to her. She could hear the occasional murmur of voices from the Alpha's camp, growing more distant as she worked her way downstream. After nearly a mile, she found what she was looking for: a section of the river where fallen trees created a natural bridge to the opposite bank. It was treacherous, the logs slick with moss and spray, but passable to someone with her agility and familiarity with the forest. Arden approached the crossing cautiously, every sense alert for danger. The effects of the river's tears still hummed through her veins, but she took no chances. Pausing in the shelter of a dense thicket, she scanned the opposite bank for any sign of scouts or sentries. Nothing moved except the gentle sway of branches in the evening breeze. Taking a deep breath, Arden stepped from her hiding place and began making her way toward the fallen trees. She had nearly reached them when a voice spoke from directly behind her. "Impressive," said the Alpha King. "I didn't think you'd risk crossing the river." Arden spun, her knife already in her hand, though she knew it would provide little defense. Matthias Blackthorn stood less than 10 paces away, his massive frame somehow having approached without making a sound. He was alone, or at least appeared to be, his golden eyes gleaming in the gathering darkness as they assessed her with unconcealed interest. "You've taken something to mask your scent," he observed, taking a step closer. "Clever, but I don't need to smell you to find you. Your song left an impression that goes beyond ordinary senses." Arden backed away, her knife held before her in a grip that betrayed her lack of formal training. She had used it for hunting and survival, never for combat. Against an Alpha shifter, it might as well have been a twig for all the protection it offered. "Stay back," she warned, her voice rough from disuse, the words feeling strange in her mouth after so long. Something flickered in the Alpha's eyes at the sound of her voice, surprise, perhaps, or recognition. "So you do speak," he said. "I was beginning to wonder." Arden continued her retreat until her back pressed against the rough bark of a pine tree. There was nowhere left to run. The knife trembled slightly in her grip, but her gaze remained defiant as she faced the man who had disrupted her carefully constructed solitude. "What do you want from me?" she demanded, forcing strength into her voice despite the fear coursing through her. Matthias tilted his head slightly, studying her with the focus of a predator. "I told you what I want. Your gift is rare and valuable. I collect valuable things. I'm not a thing to be collected." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, not reaching his eyes. "No, you're not. You're a shifter with song magic who has been living illegally in my territory for 12 years. His expression hardened. "By rights, I could have you executed for trespassing alone. Never mind the unauthorized use of magical abilities." Arden's grip tightened on her knife. "Then why don't you?" "Because wasting rare talents is poor governance," he replied simply. "And because I'm curious." He took another step closer, close enough now that she could see the flecks of amber in his golden eyes. "What pack are you from? How did you end up here, alone, for so long? What are you running from?" "Nothing that concerns you." "Everything in my territories concerns me," he countered, his tone making it clear this was not a point he would concede. "Especially someone with your unique abilities." Arden felt the effects of the river's tears beginning to fade, a subtle shift in her energy, as her true nature became detectable once more. Soon, he would be able to sense not just her shifter essence, but the magic that flowed in her blood, the power she had spent a lifetime concealing. "I won't be a weapon for you," she said, guessing at his intentions. Song magic could be used for healing, yes, but also for manipulation, for influencing emotions and decisions, for swaying crowds and breaking resistances. In the hands of a ruler like Matthias Blackthorn, such power would only cement his control over the territories. Something dark and dangerous flashed in his eyes. "You don't understand your position. You have no choice in this matter." "There's always a choice." Arden raised her chin defiantly. "I chose freedom 12 years ago, and I choose it again now." With a movement born of pure instinct, she lunged, not at him, but past him, making a desperate break for the river crossing. She had taken only 3 steps when an iron grip closed around her wrist, spinning her back with enough force to send the knife flying from her grasp. In the space of a heartbeat, Arden found herself pinned against the tree, the Alpha's powerful body effectively caging her. This close, she could feel the heat radiating from him, could see the wolf lurking just beneath his human facade. "Listen carefully," he said, his voice a low growl that sent shivers down her spine. "You will come with me to the capital. You will be given appropriate accommodations, training for your abilities, and a position that makes use of your talents. You will be treated with respect as long as you comply. This is the only option that ends well for you." Arden met his gaze without flinching, though everything in her trembled at their proximity. "And if I refuse?" Matthias's expression remained impassive. "Then I'll have to consider you a threat to the crown, one that must be neutralized." The implicit threat hung in the air between them. Arden had no doubt he meant every word. This was the Alpha King, whose reputation for ruthless efficiency was known throughout the territories. He eliminated problems with the same casual efficiency with which others might swat flies. Yet something in his gaze told her he didn't want to harm her, not out of kindness, perhaps, but out of the pragmatic desire not to waste a valuable resource. "Why did you reveal yourself last night?" he asked suddenly, his voice softer but no less intense. After 12 years of silence, why sing? The unexpected question caught her off guard. Arden swallowed hard, unwilling to admit to the moment of weakness, the crushing loneliness that had driven her to break her own rules. "It doesn't matter," she said finally. "It matters to me." His eyes searched her face, looking for answers she refused to give. Song magic responds to emotion. The stronger the feeling, the more powerful the effect. "What you sent across my lands last night was extraordinary." Arden turned her face away, unwilling to let him see the vulnerability his words exposed. "It was a mistake, one I won't repeat. A shame," he murmured, surprising her. "It was beautiful." Before she could respond to this unexpected admission, a howl echoed through the forest, a signal from one of his soldiers. Matthias's head turned sharply toward the sound, his body tensing. "That's not one of mine," he said, his voice suddenly alert. In one fluid motion, he released her and stepped back, his attention now focused on the darkened forest beyond. Another howl joined the first, then another, coming from different directions. A chill ran down Arden's spine as she recognized the pattern. Not communication, but encirclement. Hunting behavior. "Who are they?" she asked, momentarily forgetting her own predicament in the face of this new threat. Matthias's expression had turned grim. "Eastern Pack," he said tersely. "They've been testing my borders for months." His golden eyes locked with hers. "It seems we're both in an unfortunate position now." Even as he spoke, shadowy figures emerged from the trees, shifters in half-form, their bodies caught between human and wolf in a monstrous blend that maximized both strength and agility. They moved with predatory grace, forming a loose circle around Arden and the Alpha King. One stepped forward, larger than the others, his features distorted by the partial shift, but recognizably human enough to speak. Well, the great Alpha King, caught alone and unguarded. The Eastern Alpha will be pleased. Matthias's posture remained relaxed, almost casual, but Arden could sense the coiled tension beneath the surface. "Varen," he acknowledged. "Still carrying out your master's dirty work, I see." The one called Varen snarled, revealing elongated canines. "Better than doing your own, Blackthorn. At least my Alpha treats his soldiers with respect. Is that why he sends you to die?" Matthias's voice carried a dangerous edge. "Make no mistake. That's how this ends for you." Varen laughed, the sound harsh and grating in his half-shifted form. You're outnumbered 6-1 and cut off from your men. His gaze shifted to Arden, assessing her with cruel interest. Though I see you've found yourself a distraction, perhaps we'll take her as a bonus. Something shifted in Matthias's demeanor, a subtle change that nonetheless made the air feel suddenly charged with deadly intent. She's under my protection, he said, his voice so quiet it was almost a whisper, yet every word seemed to vibrate with authority. Touch her, and I'll remove your head from your shoulders. Arden stared at him in confusion. Why would he offer her protection now, when moments ago he had been threatening her himself? Was it merely that he considered her his prize to claim, not theirs? Varen seemed unimpressed by the threat. Bold words for a dead man. He gestured to his companions. Take them both. Kill him if he resists too much, but the Eastern Alpha wants his head recognizable. What happened next occurred too quickly for Arden's eyes to fully track. One moment Matthias stood beside her. The next, he was in motion. A blur of lethal grace as he met the first attacker head-on. There was a sickening crack. A howl of pain cut suddenly short, and then the Alpha King was engaging the second and third attackers simultaneously. He hadn't shifted, Arden realized with shock. He was fighting in human form against half-shifted opponents, and he was winning. Her momentary awe was interrupted as she sensed movement behind her. One of the Eastern Wolves had circled around, attempting to flank her while the others engaged Matthias. Without thinking, Arden dove for her fallen knife, scooping it up and spinning to face her attacker. The half-shifted wolf lunged, claws extended. Arden dodged, her years in the wilderness having honed her reflexes to razor sharpness. She slashed with her knife, opening a shallow cut across her attacker's arm. He snarled in pain and surprise, clearly not expecting resistance from what appeared to be an ordinary human woman. His next attack was more cautious, wary of the knife. Arden kept moving, using the trees as cover, aware that she couldn't match him for strength but might outmaneuver him. A desperate plan formed in her mind. "Help!" she cried, her voice carrying through the trees. "Over here!" The Eastern Wolf faltered, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting reinforcements to appear. In that moment of distraction, Arden struck, not with her knife, but with her voice, unleashing a sharp, focused note that carried her will behind it. "Sleep," she commanded, the word vibrating with power. The effect was immediate. The half-shifted wolf's eyes rolled back, his body crumpling to the ground like a puppet with cut strings. Arden staggered slightly, the use of focused song magic after so long draining her more than she'd expected. She turned to find Matthias standing amid 3 fallen attackers, his knuckles bloodied but otherwise appearing unharmed. The remaining 2 Eastern Wolves were retreating into the forest, apparently deciding that even 6-1 wasn't favorable odds against the Alpha King. Matthias looked at her, then at the unconscious wolf at her feet. His golden eyes narrowed slightly. "Sleep command," he said. Not a question, but an observation. "Effective." Arden said nothing, her chest heaving from exertion and the aftermath of fear. She still held her knife, though she knew it would be useless against him if he decided to press his earlier demands. Instead, to her surprise, he turned away, addressing the unconscious Eastern Wolves. "When you wake," he said, his voice laden with alpha command, "you will return to your master with a message. The Western territories are mine. The next incursion will be met with full-scale war." He turned back to Arden, his expression unreadable in the deepening twilight. "It seems we have a common enemy," he observed. "The Eastern Alpha has wanted my lands for years. Now it appears he's grown bold enough to attempt direct assassination." "That has nothing to do with me," Arden said, taking a step back. The effects of using song magic, combined with the fading influence of the river's tears, left her feeling dangerously vulnerable. "It has everything to do with you," Matthias countered. "You just witnessed an attack on the crown. That makes you involved, whether you wish to be or not." Arden's grip tightened on her knife. "I'm still not going with you." To her surprise, Matthias sighed, running a hand through his dark hair, in a gesture that seemed strangely human for someone with so much power. "You used song magic to defend yourself, and by extension me. That suggests you're not the threat I initially assumed." "I'm not a threat to anyone," Arden said firmly. "I just want to be left alone. Unfortunately, that's no longer possible." His tone was matter-of-fact rather than threatening. "The Eastern Wolves saw you with me. Whether or not you come to the capital, they'll assume you're under my protection, which means you're now a target." The realization sank in, cold and unwelcome. After 12 years of careful anonymity, she had been seen, not just by the Alpha King, but by enemy shifters. Her sanctuary was compromised. Her safety, already precarious, now hung by the thinnest of threads. "I can disappear again," she insisted, though the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. Matthias shook his head. "Not from this. The Eastern Alpha has spies throughout the territories. He'll find you, and when he does..." He left the rest unsaid, but the implication was clear. "So my choices are to be your prisoner or his?" Arden laughed bitterly. "That's no choice at all." "Not my prisoner," Matthias corrected, his golden eyes intent on her face. "My protected subject. There's a difference." "Is there?" She met his gaze directly, challenging despite her vulnerable position. "You threatened to neutralize me if I refused to comply with your demands. How is that protection?" For a moment, something like regret flickered across his features. "I was hasty in my approach," he admitted, surprising her again. "Song magic is rare and often dangerous in untrained hands. I reacted to the potential threat, not to you as an individual." It was as close to an apology as she was likely to get from the Alpha King. Arden regarded him warily, unsure what to make of this shift in his demeanor. "And now?" she asked cautiously. "Now I'm offering you a genuine choice," he said. "Come to the capital as my guest, not my prisoner. Learn to control your abilities properly. In return, I'll ensure your safety against the Eastern Pack and any other threats." "And if I still refuse?" Matthias's expression turned grave. "Then I'll respect your decision and leave you to your fate, but I strongly advise against it. The Eastern Alpha is not known for his mercy, particularly toward those with rare abilities." Arden felt trapped between impossible choices. Stay and face almost certain capture by the Eastern Pack, or go with this man who, despite his softer tone, remained the most powerful and feared ruler in the territories. Neither option offered the freedom she had cherished for 12 years. Yet when she searched his face, she found no deception there, only a directness that, while intimidating, suggested honesty. He believed what he was saying. "How do I know I can trust you?" she asked finally. "You don't," he replied simply. "But consider this. If I meant you harm, I could have taken you by force already. I have an entire company of soldiers camped upriver, and I've proven I can handle myself in combat." He gestured to the unconscious Eastern wolves. "The fact that we're still having this conversation suggests I'm sincere in my offer." The logic was undeniable, though it did little to ease her misgivings. Arden glanced toward the river, toward the forest that had been her home and haven for so long. The thought of leaving it behind filled her with a deep, aching sorrow. "I need to think," she said quietly. To her relief, Matthias nodded. "You have until morning. I'll ensure no Eastern wolves return tonight." He turned to leave, then paused, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "For what it's worth, I am sorry about disrupting your solitude. 12 years is a long time to survive alone. It speaks to your strength." With that unexpected acknowledgement, he disappeared into the shadows, moving as silently as he had appeared. Arden remained frozen in place for several long moments, half expecting him to return, or for his soldiers to emerge and seize her. When neither occurred, she finally allowed herself to breathe, though the knot of tension in her chest remained. She made her way back to her shelter, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. The Eastern wolves had changed everything. Her sanctuary was compromised, her carefully constructed safety shattered. Yet the alternative, placing her trust in the Alpha King, returning to civilization after 12 years in isolation, seemed equally terrifying. As she sat in her small dwelling, watching the moonlight filter through the single opening, Arden confronted the truth she had been avoiding. Her life by the river was over. Whether she chose to go with Matthias or attempt to flee elsewhere, she could never return to the peaceful solitude she had known. The song that had escaped her lips the night before had set in motion changes that could not be undone. Like ripples spreading across still water, they touched shores she had never intended to reach, bringing both danger and, perhaps, unexpected possibility. Morning would come, and with it, a decision that would alter the course of her life once more. Dawn arrived with the gentle persistence of inevitability. Arden watched the first golden rays filter through the trees, painting her simple shelter in warm light for what she knew would be the last time. She had not slept. The night had passed in a tumult of memories and fears, of weighing impossible choices and coming to terms with unavoidable change. In the end, the decision wasn't about trust. It was about survival. She gathered her few possessions one final time: the wooden box with her mother's pendant, the small book of healing lore, her knife, and a handful of dried herbs she couldn't bear to leave behind. Everything else she would abandon to the forest that had sheltered her for 12 years. As the sun climbed higher, Arden stepped outside, her heart heavy with the finality of departure. She walked to the river's edge, kneeling beside the flowing water that had been her constant companion through seasons of solitude. She dipped her fingers into the cool current, feeling its familiar caress against her skin. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice still rough and unused despite breaking her silence. "For protecting me, for keeping my secrets." The river burbled in response, continuing its eternal journey as it had long before she arrived, and would long after she departed. There was comfort in its indifference, in the knowledge that some things remained unchanged, even as her world shifted beneath her feet. Rising, Arden turned to find Matthias standing at the edge of the clearing, watching her with those intense golden eyes. He was alone, as he had been the previous evening, though she had no doubt his soldiers waited nearby. "You've decided," he said. Not a question, but a recognition of the resolve in her posture. Arden nodded once, unable to trust her voice with more words than necessary. The fewer she spoke, the less chance of her song magic unintentionally influencing their interaction. Until she understood her own abilities better, caution seemed the wisest course. On one condition, she managed finally, meeting his gaze directly. A flicker of surprise crossed his features, followed by something that might have been amusement. "You're in no position to make demands." "It's not a demand. It's a boundary." Arden squared her shoulders, finding strength in the clarification. "I'll come to your capital. I'll learn to control my abilities, but I won't be used as a weapon against others. My voice is mine to command, not yours." Matthias regarded her thoughtfully, his expression inscrutable. For a moment, Arden feared she had overstepped, that he would revert to the cold authority he had first displayed. Instead, he inclined his head in a gesture that, while not quite submission, acknowledged her terms. "Your voice is your own," he agreed, "though I expect you to use your talents in service to the kingdom when necessary." It wasn't the unequivocal acceptance she might have wished for, but it was likely the best compromise she could hope to achieve with a man accustomed to absolute authority. Arden recognized the concession for what it was, a gesture of respect she hadn't anticipated. "Then we have an agreement." The journey to the capital took 3 days, traveling at a pace set more for Arden's comfort than speed. Matthias rode beside her, seemingly content with the silence that stretched between them for long periods. When conversation did occur, it was primarily practical. Warnings about rough terrain ahead, explanations of landmarks they passed, brief histories of territories they traversed. On the evening of the second day, as they made camp in a sheltered valley, Arden found herself studying the Alpha King as he conferred with his captains. In the glow of the campfire, his features appeared less severe, the hard edges softened by flickering light. He moved with the easy confidence of one comfortable in his own power, respected but not feared by those who served him. It contrasted sharply with the tales she had heard, whispered stories of a merciless ruler who crushed opposition without hesitation, who had united fractious pacts through force of will and strategic brutality. This man, while undeniably commanding, displayed none of the casual cruelty she had expected. As if sensing her scrutiny, Matthias glanced in her direction, one eyebrow lifting in silent question. Arden quickly averted her gaze, embarrassed at being caught staring. Later, when the camp had quieted, and most had retired to their tents, he approached where she sat beside the dying fire. "You should rest," he said, settling beside her with a respectful distance between them. "We'll reach the capital by tomorrow evening." Arden nodded, though she made no move to retire. Sleep had been elusive since leaving her sanctuary, her mind too alert with new sensations after years of solitude. The constant presence of others, their scents, sounds, energies, overwhelmed her senses in ways she hadn't anticipated. "It will get easier," Matthias said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "Returning to pack life after isolation. The adjustment period is difficult, but not insurmountable." She glanced at him, curious despite herself. You speak from experience? Something flickered in his golden eyes. A shadow of memory, quickly suppressed. My training as heir included periods of solitary survival. Nothing approaching your 12 years, but enough to understand the challenge of reintegration. It was the most personal information he had volunteered since their meeting. Arden found herself wanting to know more, to understand the man behind the title and reputation. The impulse surprised her. She had expected to maintain emotional distance, to view him solely as a necessary alliance for survival. "Why did you really come looking for me?" she asked, the question that had lingered since their first encounter. The truth, not the official reason. Matthias studied her for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. Then, with unexpected candor, he replied, "Your song reached me in a way nothing has in years. It awakened something I thought long buried." His gaze turned to the fire, watching the dying embers. Curiosity, perhaps, or recognition of something kindred. The admission hung in the air between them, vulnerable in its honesty. Arden didn't know how to respond, caught off guard by the glimpse beneath his carefully maintained facade. "The official reason is also true," he continued after a moment. "Song magic is rare and valuable, particularly in these times. The Eastern Alpha grows bolder by the day. War seems increasingly inevitable. And you thought I could give you an advantage? It wasn't a question. I thought you could help protect my people," he corrected gently. "There's a difference." Before Arden could respond, a commotion erupted at the perimeter of the camp. Shouts of alarm followed by the distinctive sounds of combat. Matthias was on his feet instantly, his posture shifting from relaxed to alert in the space of a heartbeat. "Eastern wolves," he growled, his eyes flaring with golden light. "Stay here." He moved toward the disturbance with deadly grace, his form blurring as he partially shifted. Not the monstrous half-form she had seen the Eastern wolves adopt, but something more controlled, more elegant in its deadly efficiency. Arden stood frozen, torn between the instinct to flee and the realization that there was nowhere to run. Around her, the camp erupted into organized chaos as Matthias's soldiers responded to the threat with practiced precision. The attack was swift and brutal. Eastern wolves poured from the surrounding forest, more numerous than those they had encountered by the river. They fought with desperate ferocity, suggesting a mission of critical importance rather than a random border skirmish. From her position by the fire, Arden could see Matthias at the center of the conflict, a dark whirlwind of lethal movement. His soldiers formed a protective ring around him, but the sheer number of attackers threatened to overwhelm even their disciplined defense. A cold certainty settled in Arden's chest. This was no ordinary raid. This was an assassination attempt. The Eastern Alpha had sent his forces not merely to test borders, but to eliminate his greatest rival once and for all. Even as she recognized the danger, a Eastern wolf broke through the defensive line, charging directly toward her with murderous intent. Instinct took over. Arden drew her knife, knowing it would provide little protection, but unwilling to die without resistance. The wolf lunged, jaws gaping. Arden dodged, slashing with her blade but missing as her attacker twisted midair with inhuman agility. She stumbled backward, nearly falling as her heel caught on a root. In that moment of vulnerability, she made a choice that would change everything. Arden opened her mouth and sang. Not a lullaby or command, but a war song, ancient and powerful, passed down through her bloodline from a time when shifters first walked the earth. The sound that emerged from her throat was both beautiful and terrible, a melody that carried the rage of storms and the strength of mountains. It washed over the battlefield like a physical force, bolstering the Western wolves while sending waves of disorientation through their enemies. Eastern wolves faltered, their movements becoming uncoordinated as the song disrupted their focus and resolve. Western soldiers, in contrast, fought with renewed vigor, as if the music itself granted them strength beyond their normal capabilities. At the center of it all, Matthias paused for the briefest moment, his golden eyes finding Arden across the chaos. In that shared glance, something passed between them. Recognition, understanding, a silent acknowledgement of power freely given rather than coerced. Then he was moving again, capitalizing on the advantage her song had provided. With surgical precision, he cut through the disoriented Eastern forces, driving them back into the forest from which they had emerged. Arden maintained her song until the last enemy had fled or fallen, until her throat burned with the effort, and her vision swam from exhaustion. As the final notes faded, she swayed on her feet, the world tilting precariously around her. Strong arms caught her before she could collapse, lowering her gently to the ground. Through the haze of fatigue, she recognized Matthias's scent, pine and winter, and something uniquely his own. "Breathe," he murmured, supporting her as she struggled to remain conscious. "Just breathe. It will pass." Arden fought to focus on his voice, using it as an anchor, as waves of exhaustion threatened to pull her under. Gradually, the world steadied, though weakness still permeated every limb. That was... Matthias seemed to search for words adequate to describe what he had witnessed. "Extraordinary. I've never seen song magic wielded with such raw power. I've never used it like that before," Arden admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "It was instinct." His expression turned grave. "You saved many lives tonight, including quite possibly my own." He glanced toward where his soldiers were tending to wounded comrades. The Eastern Alpha must be truly desperate to attempt such a direct assault. Arden followed his gaze, the reality of her situation settling more firmly upon her shoulders. This was the world she was entering, a world of power struggles and violence, of political maneuvering and lethal consequences. After 12 years of solitude, the complexity of it felt overwhelming. "Why does he hate you so much?" she asked, genuinely curious about the conflict that had now ensnared her. Matthias's expression darkened. "It's not personal hatred, but pragmatic ambition. The Eastern territories are resource-poor compared to the Western lands. His people suffer while mine prosper." His voice held no satisfaction at this disparity, only a weary acknowledgement of reality. "I've offered trade agreements, access to hunting grounds, even marriage alliances to ease tensions. He rejects all peaceful solutions. He wants conquest, not cooperation," Arden concluded. "Yes, and my death would throw the Western Pax into disarray, creating an opportunity he's been waiting for." Matthias sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. Tonight proves he's growing bolder, or more desperate. As the adrenaline of battle faded, Arden became acutely aware of their proximity. Matthias still supported her, one arm around her shoulders, his body radiating warmth that chased away the night's chill. She should have felt uncomfortable with such closeness after years of isolation. Instead, she found it oddly reassuring. "Thank you," he said suddenly, his voice pitched low for her ears alone, "for using your gift freely when you could have remained neutral, or fled." The sincerity in his tone caught her off guard. Arden met his golden gaze, finding in it a depth of emotion she hadn't expected from the stoic Alpha King. "I didn't do it for political reasons," she admitted. "I just couldn't stand by and watch." That makes it all the more meaningful. Something shifted between them in that moment. Not a dramatic declaration or revelation, but a subtle realignment, like puzzle pieces settling into their proper places. Arden felt it in the steady beat of her heart, in the calm certainty that replaced her earlier trepidation. She had chosen correctly. Whatever challenges awaited in the capital, whatever complications her new life might bring, she was on the right path. For the first time since leaving her sanctuary, the weight of regret lifted from her shoulders. The capital city of Blackthorn appeared on the horizon the following evening, its stone walls gleaming gold in the setting sun. It was larger than Arden had imagined, sprawling across a series of gentle hills, with the Alpha's fortress crowning the highest peak. As they approached the main gates, Matthias slowed his mount to ride beside her. "Welcome to your new home," he said, watching her expression carefully. "It will take time to adjust, but I think you'll find your place here." Arden nodded, too overwhelmed to speak as they passed beneath the massive stone archway. The streets beyond teemed with life, shifters in human form going about their daily business, merchants calling their wares, children darting between stalls in a game of chase. After 12 years of silence and solitude, the noise and energy were almost painful in their intensity. Yet beneath the discomfort lay a flicker of something she had nearly forgotten, the sense of belonging that came from being among her own kind. Not quite pack, not yet, but no longer completely alone. As they made their way toward the fortress, people stopped to bow or offer respectful nods to their Alpha. Many cast curious glances at Arden, clearly wondering about the unknown woman who rode at the king's side. She felt exposed under their scrutiny, fighting the urge to shrink back into invisibility as she had done for so long. Matthias seemed to sense her discomfort. "They're curious, not hostile," he assured her quietly. "News of your song magic will spread quickly." You'll find respect rather than fear once they understand your gift. And if they do fear me? Arden asked, giving voice to the concern that had followed her since childhood. Her mother had warned of the suspicion that often greeted those with rare abilities, the jealousy and mistrust that could poison even the strongest pack bonds. Then they'll answer to me, Matthias replied with simple finality. His words carried no threat, merely the calm certainty of absolute authority. The fortress rose before them, its ancient stones seemingly carved from the mountain itself. Guards snapped to attention as their king approached, though Arden noted the genuine respect in their eyes, rather than blind fear. Matthias dismounted in one fluid motion, then moved to assist Arden from her horse. His hands were strong and sure at her waist, setting her gently on the cobblestone courtyard. My seneschal will show you to your quarters, he said, nodding toward an older wolf, who approached with dignified purpose. Rest, adjust. We'll speak more tomorrow about your training and duties. Arden hesitated, suddenly reluctant to be separated from the one familiar presence in this overwhelming new world. Matthias seemed to understand, his expression softening slightly. The Eastern attack has changed things, he said, his voice pitched for her ears alone. Your gift, freely given in defense of my people, has earned you more than guest status. You'll have freedom within these walls, Arden. I gave my word, and I keep it. The use of her name, spoken with unexpected warmth, sent a flutter through her chest. She nodded, finding comfort in his reassurance. Until tomorrow, then. Until tomorrow, he echoed, something like anticipation coloring his tone. As Arden followed the seneschal into the fortress that would become her new home, she cast one final glance over her shoulder. Matthias stood watching her, his powerful frame silhouetted against the setting sun, golden eyes gleaming in the fading light. She had lived in silence by the river for 12 years. That chapter of her life was closed now, its solitude and safety exchanged for something altogether more complex and uncertain. But as she stepped across the threshold into her new life, Arden felt a strange sense of homecoming, as if her song, carried across the wilderness to the Alpha King's ears, had not been a mistake, but a beginning. Her voice, silent for so long, had found its purpose, and in the Alpha King's golden gaze, she had found something she never expected, not a master seeking to control her gift, but an equal who recognized its value. The song that had reached him that night by the river had changed everything. But as Arden followed the seneschal deeper into the fortress, she realized that some changes, even those born of necessity rather than choice, opened doors to possibilities previously unimagined. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. For tonight, it was enough to know she was no longer alone. 6 months later, Arden stood on the highest balcony of the fortress, watching the first snow of winter dust the city below. Her breath formed delicate clouds in the crisp air as she leaned against the stone railing, a smile playing at the corners of her lips. Life in Blackthorn had surprised her in countless ways. Where she had expected confinement, she found purpose. Where she had feared being used, she discovered collaboration. The royal music master had helped her refine her gift, teaching her control and nuance that transformed her raw talent into something both powerful and precise. I thought I might find you here, came a familiar voice from behind. Arden turned to find Matthias approaching, his dark hair dusted with snowflakes. In the month since her arrival, something had shifted between them, a gradual warming that transformed respect into friendship, and friendship into something deeper neither had yet named aloud. The first snow always feels like magic, she explained, turning back to the view. Even more than song. He joined her at the railing, their shoulders nearly touching. The Eastern Alpha sent another peace delegation this morning, the third this month, Arden noted with quiet satisfaction. Their shared smile acknowledged what remained unspoken. The Eastern attacks had ceased after word spread of the Western King's new song mage, a woman whose voice could turn the tide of any battle, whose melodies could heal wounds or shatter resolve. The truth was more nuanced, but the reputation served its purpose. They fear your gift, Matthias said, but I cherish the woman who wields it. Arden's heart quickened at the tenderness in his tone. Slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, he reached for her hand, his fingers twined with hers, warm despite the winter chill. 12 years of silence, he murmured, and yet your song found me. Perhaps it was always meant to, she replied, her voice soft but certain. As snow continued to fall around them, Arden leaned slightly into his warmth. The solitude of her river sanctuary seemed distant now, a chapter closed but not forgotten. She had found a different kind of peace here, one built on connection rather than isolation, on sharing her gift rather than hiding it. The Alpha King drew her closer, and Arden went willingly. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new songs to sing. But for now, in this perfect moment between past and future, it was enough to stand in comfortable silence with the man who had heard her voice when no one else could. If you enjoyed this story, a like or comment really helps. And if you wish to hear more tales like this one, make sure you subscribe so you never miss the next tale.